before I start, I'd like to say well done to all of those community groups we've heard from so far. There's some really impressive work going on. A lot of that I didn't know about actually until now, so it's been great to see. Normally I work in the field of aquatic animal health and biosecurity, and things like white spot disease you might have heard of. But today I've got my hat on for OzFish. Now OzFish are a community group who work on fish habitat, and of course in the context of Pumicestone Passage we're interested in where are we at with our fish stocks and what's the fishery like. And the theme that we've sort of been hearing throughout this so far is we're seeing a bit of a decline in fish stocks. And usually you have community groups like OzFish in Australia, established in 2015, and their motto was helping fishers restore habitat across Australia, with the motto of more habitat equals more fish. So there's a component of self-interest, and we're seeing, there's a large amount of recreational fishers around the country. It's a very big industry, but there seems to be just a small percentage of those people sort of wake up and start thinking about where do their fish come from, and start linking the need for healthy habitat to the fish they're catching. And they're the sort of people we try to contact and get more involved. And to do that, OzFish have been quite smart. They have employed high-profile ambassadors in the recreational fishing media. These people, you see them on TV around the place, and to put that message across that the fish you're catching wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the habitat component. So it's part of the processes that I think Mike Ronan was talking about earlier on, that the water starts up in the catchment, it flows through the rivers where you have your fish out into your estuaries and your bays, and linking that together and linking the health of the land to the health of the sea is actually part of that process. And these guys, they're good communicators, they can get that message across. Now, the model for OzFish Unlimited, it was based on Trout Unlimited, which was a group set up in the US about 50 years ago. Since 2015, OzFish have established around 43 different chapters throughout the country. Now, and the chapter, OzFish chapter, is based around a group of concerned fishermen or fisher people who are interested in helping fix their local waterways. So it's sort of based on a catchment-based type approach. It might be in relation to, say, a large river system. Pumicestone Passage in the local case here could be a lake system up north. And so various chapters have popped up, and a lot of them are quite active. Some of the different projects that these groups have been undertaking, we'll just run through a list. So riparian revegetation and fencing, river re-snagging, especially important out west in our western rivers. Water quality and oyster health monitoring, northern New South Wales are big into that. Litter cleanup and water quality improvements, so that's sort of work that's been done around in many of the chapters. Fish passage remediation, sort of working out areas where fish can't complete their life cycle because there's a culvert or something blocking them, and working with local councils, etc., to fix those fish passage problems. Seagrass restoration, there's a Seeds for Snapper project going on in Western Australia at the moment. The OzFish Unlimited group over there actually replanting seagrass, and so it's a fairly cutting edge type of project. Oyster shell recycling and shellfish restoration, which is sort of one of the main things the chapters in Pumicestone Passage and also Central Moreton have been big into recently, and you'll hear more about that in some of the talks that are coming up from Susie and Ben Gilby. Catch and release fishing competitions. These people are fishermen. They like getting out there and contacting more people, getting their message across and raising money at the same time to fund their projects. And also control of feral or exotic introduced fish populations. And they do some, the chapters actually get into local schools and spread their message. So they're doing a wide range of different things. So in relation to Pumicestone Passage, why would we have a group of fishermen concerned about, fisher people concerned about Pumicestone Passage? As been mentioned earlier, there's been thousands of years. It's been a really healthy ecosystem that's provided cultural services and sustenance for our Indigenous groups. And it's a highly productive fishery and was well utilised immediately after European settlement. However, by the 1890s, we see through the history of the oyster fishery that eutrophication and sedimentation from the clearing of the catchments, the Brisbane River and Pumicestone catchments, has begun to damage that the dredge fishery, which were the oyster reefs that were actually across the bottom of the Pumicestone passage. Leading on to another 50 years, more development, and there was another big decline in the oyster populations in Moreton, in Pumicestone, in around the 1960s. And it was actually quite a rapid decline due to a disease called QX disease, which means Queensland unknown. But that's a protozoan disease. That's essentially, it's due to, for that disease to be expressed, you need a whole lot of sediment brought into a system to have mud for one of the intermediate hosts for the disease agent to live in. So you need the sediment, but then you also need to immunosuppress the oyster's immune system by dirtying up the water. So you need a reduction in water quality. Things like chemicals and pesticides are known to do that. So when you have both of these factors in your waterway, the QX disease can proliferate and wipe out your oyster stocks. And that actually happened in the late 1960s in Pumicestone Passage. Agriculture and forestry runoff was implicated at the time, and it seemed to fit in quite well temporally as a potential cause. So today, though, we're actually seeing sort of different problems emerging, but more frequently, and in the form of algal bloom events and fish kill events. So, which is quite unfortunate, because by the time you have adult fish dying, like this is a lake in Beachmere that's formerly probably quite productive fish nursery area. The local fishermen, I get calls all the time saying, well, the fish are dying. By the time your adult fish are dying, you've got a real problem with water quality. In this case, obviously, there's an algal bloom. We have had the Lingibia blooms that started to emerge in the 1990s. That's probably related to catchment development and movement of groundwater and things. These are other blooms that are related more to nutrient loading, but the results in these cases, oxygen depletion, fish kills. And that's unfortunately not the only one that we've been to in the last 10 or 15 years. There's other, these are different fish kills that we've been rolling up to, documenting them, and also in the case of some of the instances we have OzFish volunteers still running through actually water that they probably shouldn't be into, trying to grab the last of these fish that are still alive, these broodstock sized fish, and moving them out of those areas. So these fishermen are actually quite concerned, and they're willing to get in there and get dirty to try and fix things up. So the other thing we've been doing is recycling oyster shells as part of that oyster reef restoration program. And essentially the support for this, by the way, it was illegal to do this before we started. We had to go change legislation to be able to do it. But to do oyster reef restoration, you need the substrate to put into the water to kickstart the process. So that means going about it the right way in a biosecure manner, grabbing your oyster shells from local restaurants and processors, curing them on land, and then getting them ready to put back under the water. So that we have an oyster shell recycling centre out there at Ningi Tip, where we sanitise the oysters. They have to be out in the sunlight for at least 4 months to be able to say that you safely got rid of all the potential bugs and disease agents that could be in there. Because those oysters come from all over Australia now. The actual oyster industry that was formerly extremely productive in Pumicestone Passage is basically, it's no longer there. It's functionally not working anymore. The last leases are not being worked. And so it's gone the way that the oyster reefs, the subtidal oyster reefs went 100 years earlier. The other thing that we have done, and we're asked to talk about that today, was oyster gardening program. So the other thing we wanted to try when we were doing the oyster reef restoration work was to see if we can seed these new reefs with live oysters. So to get the live oysters, we work with our local oyster farmer, get lots of little baby oysters, put them in these baskets, hang them off the edge of the pontoons. This was done on Bribie Island with a lot of the local residents. This actually happened before OzFish became established in the local area, but a lot of the people we found who were oyster gardeners ended up joining OzFish once OzFish became sort of available, I suppose, in the local area to produce these live oysters to put them on the reefs. So another part of that project, as we went along and we started, and you'll hear more about it, Susie and Ben, as I said, we'll talk about it in more detail. We found Pumicestone Passage is actually very heavily used waterway. So there's a lot of anchor damage going on with these reefs. And so we had OzFish volunteers were building these oyster Besser fence modules, we called them, out of Besser blocks, to actually put around the reefs to try and protect them against damage from anchoring, which was the main issue. And of course, there's a monitoring component of those studies that's very important. It's a trial. And we had some of the OzFish volunteers. There's Robbie here from the Central Moreton chapter. He's a great fella. He actually went down and collected samples for us and took videos so we could actually see what was going on and spread that information to the local community. So unfortunately though, this process at the moment, we are on the back burner because we've been told as a community group's point of view that this is a trial. And the Moreton Bay Marine Park legislation actually doesn't allow us to go and actually restore shellfish reefs on a wider scale at this time. And so that indicates that this park that was established in 1993, it's actually been established on a shifted management baseline. And that's it's something that will need to be addressed because it's actually not accommodating the need to actually restore these damaged ecosystems. It doesn't even recognise they exist. And for this reason, we're actually not doing oyster gardening, any of these other things I showed you. I'm recycling oyster shells at the moment, but just on my own because I can't ask these volunteers to spend their valuable time for something where we're not actually sure if and when we'll get to use the oysters later on. So that's something we're working through. COVID certainly has not helped. A lot of these people are retired and have that spare time on their hands. And meanwhile, we're seeing this water quality decline and algal blooms and fish kills. So I think this is something that I've heard throughout the talk. It's a very common theme. We need to work on this runoff. We need to cleanse it and promote active restoration wherever we can in this ecosystem so that we have these valuable ecosystems like shellfish reefs. And the government community can work together to slow this decline and potentially reverse it. So thank you. Just before I go, anyone can actually join OzFish if you're interested. Don't have to be a fisherman. They have funding through BCF. Whenever you go to BCF store, you can give your change to their habitat work. So thanks.
Okay, you've got questions.
Oh.
Okay, Ben, a couple of questions here. What comments do you have about environmentally friendly moorings? They're designed to stop seagrass being ripped out by block and anchor chain.
Yeah, well, there should be more of them because there's certainly a lot of anchor damage out there, and we know that from what we're seeing from our shellfish reef trial. And if you design these like a mooring properly, you can have the boat anchored safely and provide extra habitat underneath, whether it be for shellfish if you design it correctly with the right underhangs, or even just as basically an artificial reef block which fish can hide under. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area that could be very fruitful, but again, it needs the permissions to be able to get in there and do it.